And we're live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to a very special episode of my creative journey, Season 2, Episode number 10. Now, as some of you may be aware, I have recently moved onto the road to go traveling with my wife, Emily, who is here with me today in this episode, our dog Maya as well. We've recently gone on the road to go traveling, and today I wanted to do an episode, a bit of a special episode, talking about that and what we're going through at the moment, what the changes are in my business and how things are running on the road, but also just general chit chat. We wanted to do a sort of a Q&A episode. Emily wanted to ask a few questions and sit down and talk about a few things about me, because this podcast hasn't been so much about me, and I know that a lot of people have been asking a little bit about that. So hopefully in this episode we can dive a bit deeper into that. Apologies if the audio is a little bit bad or the video quality is different than normal. We're outside here at the moment. We're at the beach down in Victoria, outside of Melbourne at the moment, recording this episode, but I wanted to bring you guys into our world. If you're watching the video, hopefully it's a nice setting to have this episode in, but if you're listening to the audio, hopefully, not much has changed. So as I said, we've recently moved onto the road. We're traveling around Australia in a caravan at the moment. We're going on a few months away on a little trip, but I have, ended all my work as a photographer where I was based in Sydney beforehand. Had a bit of a break, and I'd planned that in for a little bit of time beforehand to give myself a break to go away and go traveling. And I think that was one of those big things that I really wanted to do, and it's been rather scary to plan towards that, but it was something that I really wanted to do, is be able to give us space to go traveling. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to work so far on the road. We've been on the road for about a week now, and being able to work on the road is very different to being at home. Obviously it's a new world to being able to get everything set up and work away from a normal office space or home, but very fortunate to be able to sustain it, I guess, be able to do it in a way that not a lot of people can. And I think hearing from a lot of people over the past week has been very inspiring in a way, because a lot of people dream to do this, and that we're able to do it is very exciting. Being able to go on the road and take and do photography and educate and make content and record this podcast on the road is so special.
So thinking about that then, how are you actually with everything? Obviously it's a big change. It's been a week. It's very different to how our lives were, not only personally is our own adjustment, but in work and ending weddings specifically.
I think it's a weird adjustment. I know that we'd been planning for it for quite a long time. At the start of this year, so end of 2024 now, at the start of 2024, we decided to make a plan to sort of go away traveling in 2025. So I'd planned to not have any work sort of booked in, so I'd stopped taking inquiries for 2025. So this had been planned for quite a while, but still, it's sort of a nerve-wracking experience to think that you don't have any work lined up. And I think that's one of the biggest things in this career, being online and working for yourself, is that when you don't have work, when you don't have people booked in, there's that always fear that it's going to dry up and that you're not going to get back to where you were.
So I think the natural question from that is, because you've said I've ended all my work and there's a fear of not having money, I think people are going to be like, well then how the hell are you making money here?
It's mostly, I think for me, it's been online, through brand partnerships or through my own sort of digital products or my own photo academy, which launched a couple of weeks ago. So making money through that way, and being able to monetize my own products and educational content in that space. I've been doing that for quite a while now in the educational space, but actually earning an income from it, I think, is a completely different thing when you talk about how to make money around content on any type of social media platform. It's not really that many options. So finding a way to make money for yourself through your own products and what you can sell online, it obviously opens you up to a whole new market as well, being able to sell products to people all over the world. Educational content, of course, but then obviously other like digital products. I have my brush pack and things like that. So able to sell those to anyone in the world. So it opens you up a lot, but it's also very scary because a lot of people aren't able to do that, and that road hasn't been very well paved.
I'm really interested in that because for people who don't know, we've been together like almost 7 years next year, and I think it's funny because when you first started as a wedding photographer, you had very similar feelings of like, you know, I don't know when money's going to come in. Like most people book 12 to 18 months in advance. So like there's going to be a lag between when I start my business and when I actually have business, if that makes sense. Like, yes, you get deposits and things, but you had these very similar feelings to now being in, I guess, more of the social media world and still feeling like that's not a guarantee. Does that feel like the same feeling for you, or is there something different?
Kind of feels like the same feeling, although I think in this space, it's more that I have control over what I put out into the world in a way that I'm not working directly for a client, I'm working for myself. And so there's always, I think when you work in a service-based industry, there's always that fear of you have to appease a client in order to get a referral to get new work coming through the door. Or you have to sort of show your worth to a client in that way. And when you're selling high-ticket items to clients, it can be hard to feel like, well, you don't really need, like if you don't get an inquiry, if you don't get a sale that sort of week or that month, then all of a sudden you've gone off the rails. Where for me now it's like, well, everything I do is my own products. And so anything that I put in, I'm going to get out. But I'm also not selling something super high ticket that I'm like, well, if I don't get, it's not a difference between making 1 or 2 sales. There's a difference between, you know, making 100 sales or making like 80 sales in a particular month. That's not as big of a difference because they're smaller priced items. So for me, I feel a more sense of security in that. And I think that also on the other side of that, it's like, well, there's always going to be that fear around you're not going to have work. It could all dry up tomorrow. And I think that has allowed me to go into this a lot more open because I had gone into my other photography business. When I jumped into that, it was like, well, I didn't have a lot of work when I first started and I just jumped in and it worked out. So that gave me more confidence to jump into this space, online educating and selling products more easily because I knew that it'll work out and I'll find a way to make it work because anything that I put in, I get out.
And I think there's like room for that, right? Of like feeling uncertain because we both had that, you know, for people who don't know me, like I went to uni and worked in the degree that I ended with and had very like quote unquote like stable work because I was in the caring profession. But we did definitely navigate those feelings and I guess get comfortable with the uncomfortable and get comfortable with not knowing what your income's going to be next year or next week or next month, which has probably helped you step into this. I think other people will find it maybe inspiring to hear because it's so often what stops people is like being scared that things won't work out and that you won't find a path. And I think similarly to like what we're doing on the road is things are going to work out because I think when you're thrown into the deep end and when you take that leap or in whatever way that is for you, you'll make it work and you'll figure it out on the way because if you don't take it, you'll never know what's ahead of you. Like you can never prepare 100% for anything.
Oh, of course. You'll never know what opportunities are around the corner. And in the exact same way, I wouldn't go in completely blind either. Like I think that there's absolutely that happy grey zone where like we've been planning for this for a long time. I've definitely tried to build something up over the last year to make it possible to do this. So I haven't just thrown myself in the deep end, but it's also not at the point where it like is on autopilot completely. Like it's still very hands-on and I've still got to do a lot of work continually to keep it growing. So it's like, well, I know that it's in some direction, and I've always said this when, you know, if you can make one sale, you know that there's a proof of concept. And if you earn any money, then it just means then you've got to turn it up. You've got to turn up your marketing, turn up how many people how many eyes you're getting on your work. Because if you can make one sale, that means one person is interested in it. If one person is, then probably there are a lot of people. And so that was the thing for me. It's like, well, it's starting to work. So now it's just like, well, I know that it's plausible. I've just got to then turn up and crank that dial and find a way to make my own path in it.
Which I think is exactly what you've done over the past, you know, since we met and you kind of started photography. Like when anyone asks, I'm always like, yes, it feels like his follower growth came about quickly, but it's on the back of years of just trying so many things. Like it wasn't like a magic a magic formula. And when you did find that something went well, you just kept doing that one thing, and now it's kind of like your style, I guess. I don't think you go into it being like, this will be my style. This is how every video is going to look. Like, you just adapt.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's weird to feel like you have a style, because I think my style is planted in my personality. And I think that comes through, and I hope it comes through in the work that I do and the content that I create, because that is ever able to change. And people, if you can get people hooked on your personality and who you are and the way that you do things, I think that that's much easier to grow a brand around that, because it then can evolve over time. If you get too stuck in a style, it can be hard to evolve, because you're forever stuck on one thing and people only know you for one specific style of thing. If you ever do want to change, which you probably will down the track, it gets very hard to progress.
So thinking about your style then, because you referenced like it's embedded in who you are and that's just coming through. What would you say that is then? Like, what is coming through? How does you as a person, as a creative, come through your business, but also, your business, but also your photography?
It's a hard question to answer, to be on the other side of the coin there, to say what other people perceive. I don't know. I think if I can say what I'm trying to portray,
maybe.
is that there's some sense of like honesty, some sense of like insecurity in my own work as well. Like I don't ever want to feel like I'm portraying this character that has it all together or understands everything or like knows everything. A sense of like just exploring things, like trying new things. And I think that comes through. It's very like, open to new experiences, exploratory, like throwing yourself out there, trying new things. I think that comes through, and people are hooked on that because they're like, wow, I wish I could do that. I wish I could be that. And that's what I'm trying to push myself to do. I'm not necessarily that person generally in real life, but it's like I'm pushing myself out there to be that person, because that's who I'd like to be. And it makes it easier, I think, online to push yourself and become someone else almost, because that's the version that a lot of people would love to see themselves in. And so,
and it's filtered.
Yeah, of course. It's never going to be the truest version of yourself. That's why I like this podcast. It's because it's very hard to be scripted in an hour-long content. So for me, it's like, or in those little short pieces, I can be someone, I can portray a character, and hopefully give those emotions and that feeling of who I want to be. Because I think a lot of things that you see online are so untrue, not real. And people go too far the other way where they pretend to be someone they're not. But I'm just trying to pretend to be the person who I'd like to be, like amplified version, I guess, in order to get the sort of point across. So hopefully it comes through as being honest, being real, being true, but also that, insecurity, that feeling of like you can just try new things and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
I love that you pulled at those points of your personality. Firstly, because for people who might, again, not be aware, that you did science or like physics at university, and you spoke to the different elements of your personality, but also your problem solving and like your insecurity. And I think that, and the reason I kind of bring that up is because I've heard a lot of people ask you questions that like, I'm this and I want a career change, or I want to go into photography and like blah, 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 blah. But like, how do I support my family? Or I'm feeling too insecure, or I'm scared, or what if it doesn't work? And I think that's an interesting thing that you bring up, because when you were in the science field and trying to navigate into photography, it was really scary and it was a U-turn. There was a lot of people who were like, what are you kind of doing? Like, how is this all related? And I think that you felt insecure, you had to problem solve, and you needed to be real to yourself. And I think that's what comes through. And so I think that's a message, or something at least I got out of that from what you said, is that no matter what you are or what you do in your life, everything is valuable to the next thing that you'll do. So even if, you're in science, like, it's going to help you be in photography, because you said you like to experiment. You experiment with certain things. You say that you like to, learn things. That's going to happen. You also say you want to show your insecurities. You also had that lived experience and understand what it's like being in that career change. So I think that when people say particularly like, oh, it's too late for me or whatever, like that's not true, because that thing is only going to be a stepping stone and I guess enhance what you're going to bring to the table later. And that's why it's so good to be able to like niche down, because everyone's going to have a different lived experience that they can bring.
I think that's important, because when you talk about your niche, a lot of people think that that has to be a specific style of creativity that you do. But I think a big part of it, as you said, is your personality. That is your brand, who you are. That's why people are attracted to you. And that comes through your experiences that you've had in the past. And that comes through things that you've done before, previous jobs, previous experiences in other industries, but experiences that you've had with other people as well. I think artists often forget that they're in like a creative business. Like they work with other people as well. And so a big part of art is having someone who you're trying to sell that art to. It doesn't matter what type of art you do. So you have to connect with people in order to do it. So if you've had any experience working with other people before, that comes through in your art and the way that you do business. So I think that is really the real key thing for a lot of people, is like understanding that, and that is you, and everything that you've done prior adds up to who you are now. And don't feel like you have to throw all that away just to create a new version of yourself to sort of step into this new world.
You spoke about being a creative, and like people think that that's how you have to be. Like you have to be in a niche to be creative and like working with other people. How do you think being a creative actually influences your world? Like how you see the world, how you interact with the world?
It's interesting. I don't know. I think being a creative person, it's kind of hard, because it's this weird sort of thing where I think that there's two specific types of creative people. I think there's people who can pull ideas out of like nowhere. I think that I'm creative in the sense of like being able to work something into something else. So trying to being able to mold something into something else, whether that be an idea from one profession and sort of turn it into another, and use ideas from one place and bring them across into the other. The same with art, like bringing an idea from one different style of art into another. And I often like see things in everyday life of being like, oh, I'm able to see, like I go out to a restaurant, for example, and eat something and then think, oh, that's really interesting sort of contrast in that. And seeing that in an image, for example, or bringing that into something else. So you see the different artistic things in different ways, but some people can bring things out of like can pull things out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I think that those type of artistic people are very different. See, I find myself very like business minded in that way, that I'm like, well, how can I make that? How can I turn that into a product? How can I think of something that I enjoy and turn it into a product that I could sell and make money from? And I think that there is a lot of creativity in that. I think a lot of people overlook that as a creative expression, because I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned is like, you can sort of sell anything, but it doesn't have to be selling per se. It can be just like, you can find something that is going to provide value to other people, because if you're finding it valuable, if you can create something that you find valuable, then other people are probably going to find it valuable as well. So it's not that it has to be sleazy in the way that you sell something to someone else. It's that, you know, if you find it valuable, how can you sort of be creative in the way that you sort of package it and provide that to the world, and hopefully through that other people will find enjoyment in that.
And I think that is so important, because as we grow, like we're really creative as kids, like we'll come up with ideas galore, and then somewhere along the way we're told that like a creative person is someone that draws or paints or does art or is a photographer or does things where you create a beautiful outcome or an outcome that can be consumed. So whether that's, as I said, like art or clay or, you know, dance or singing. But I think we've lost the confidence in ourselves to be a creative person in any profession that we're in. Like every single profession and everything you do, work on or leisure, you will get creative and you will come up with ideas that are uniquely your own because you're experiencing that world. You're experiencing what works well, what doesn't work well, and you've probably come up with a billion ideas about this would work so well if I did this. Like, how often have we sat at a computer or we've sat somewhere and been like, oh, I love this, but it'd be so good if it had this. Or, you know, if I could tweak it this way, but yet we're almost too afraid to take that next step to actually create something because we're told we're not creative and that's someone else's job to do the creating and we're just here to use it.
It's weird. I think that, yeah, so many people have very creative ideas and a lot of people are creative and we forget to be that because we're not necessarily rewarded for being creative. I think a lot of things in life are stick to the script and just do things the way they've always been done, and that's how you get by. Yeah. It can be easy to stick to the status quo because, you know, it's the way things have been done, and a lot of people have been successful. Not successful, they've been able to sustain themselves, probably is the right word, by sort of doing that. And so a lot of friends or family members will tell you to go against being creative and just do the things that way things have always been done. But I think a lot of people do have creative ideas, but the ones that are successful, the ones that act on them. I think a lot of people get held back by, oh, well, it's just a stupid idea. I probably shouldn't do that, or I shouldn't spend time doing this, or I shouldn't go down that track, or they don't put 100% into something. Yeah. And so you're never going to see success, of course. And if that's your only basis, what you're basing something on is like, I've tried something for half a year, I half-assed it didn't really go well, I didn't put everything into it that I possibly could, and then you sort of give up and turn around and go back to what everyone else has been doing. Well, you haven't really tried anything.
Yeah, I want to kind of touch on that a little bit because I am proclaimed, I like cycle through ideas, I like to try a lot of things, and I don't often stick to things or go 100%. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I guess something that I've heard other people talk about, I've experienced myself, is like, I don't have the time, money, energy, mental health capacity, like all these things to go fully in it. And I mean, everyone's finance is going to be different, and I feel like that's its whole own thing. But I want to understand mentally, because I know it hasn't all been easy, like how, I guess, have you managed that? And what kind of advice or even reflections, it doesn't have to be advice, would you give to other people? Because I think that particularly, I know you've had some followers before who have been like, well, I'm a father, or I'm a mother, or I'm a wife, or whatever. And these things can be really hard to balance.
Absolutely. And I think, as you said, everyone has different circumstances. And so whether you're, the advantages that you have of being in a different stage of life can be a big upside.
Absolutely.
If you've got,
will always play a part. Yeah.
Always. If you've got more time than someone else, if you're more financially stable than someone else, then you're obviously going to find it a lot easier. So I don't want to discredit that in saying that yes, I did have a lot of time. I was very fortunate that I'm not older. I didn't have kids. I don't have other responsibilities. I don't have any sort of debt. So to be able to make changes in life was easier at that stage. I do want to touch on what you said before about not like sticking to something and finding something. I think that there's a difference between not sticking with something because you don't enjoy it, but not sticking with something because you haven't found success in it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a distinction there for a lot of people. They're like, well, I can't stick at something. I haven't found something that I enjoy. Well, I think that's okay. In that stage, try different things. Like, I didn't find something that I enjoyed for a long time, you know, or I mean, a long time in my perspective, but I tried a couple of things and I eventually hit something that I enjoyed and stuck with it. I didn't immediately have success in it though.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the distinction. When people find something that they love, but then they stop it because they haven't found success in it, or they aren't able to earn an income in it, or they're not able to get what they want out of it. You know, they're an artist, they haven't been able to sell out a gallery, or they haven't been able to produce good quality music, or have a live show that other people come to. For a lot of people, I think there's something greater than just enjoying something. And if they haven't necessarily found that, that's when they give up. I think that a lot of people could get further, would they just push and just try it a little bit longer than the average person. I think that is like something that we all have, is that tendency to chop and change and start something new. But the ones that continue on are the ones that are going to find success.
Oh, absolutely. And to clarify, like, I actually think it's really good to chop and change and to just try things, because I think everything, again, always will add to whatever that final product is, whether you're 20 or you're 50 or you're 70 when you find that what that is. I think all of those experiences and all of those different experiments funnel in to make that final product. Like, I actually think that it's part of the process to try, to fail, and to keep trying heaps of things.
I think there's that that idea that always comes to my head. I don't know if you've seen the image, but it's like the graph of someone's like success, and you always see it like when it's two different people on the same path, and the first person hasn't made any money in the first 12 months. They just month without making any money, and there's another person that's done the same thing. And at 12-month mark, one person gives up, and then the other person goes to month 13 and they start to make money.
Yeah.
And then it goes up and up from there. And it's like always just on the edge of when you actually quit, that's when you will.
But and I do think though that it is worth acknowledging, like 12 months is a bloody long time. Like when you want something, like 12 months is so hard. So I guess your reflection, like what are your reflections? What are your thoughts? How has it impacted you, I guess, trying to push through those barriers? Because yes, it's that 12 months when you started wedding photography, but it was another 12 months or however long until your social media pops off. So it's not like, it's like after 12 months you'll have success and you'll never go through a hard time.
Oh, no. I'm not saying 12. And I think 12 months was just a...
Oh, it was a random...
Yeah, it was a random number I pulled out of thin air for context. But I think that, there's definitely going to be that stage. I just reflect on that because I think at the point when I'd started uploading content onto social media, I was probably at that stage where I was like, I knew I needed to change something.
Yeah.
And that was why I started posting more on social media, was because I was like, well, I need to give something else a go. Like, I'm not finding a lot of success in what I'm doing. Currently, I'm not enjoying my work as such. And so I started posting content on social media as a way to be like, give myself something to do. I started in the off season. As a photographer, I didn't have any work during the sort of cooler months, so from June to end of August. And I started in August to be like, I give myself a whole month and I'll just keep posting content every day for a month. And that was like a last hurrah. I was like, I'm going to try something, because I've tried a lot of other things and they haven't worked. I enjoy this work, but it's like, if it's not sustainable, if it's not something I can continue to do, well, why would I continue to go down that road? And you do get to that point of like, well, the end is always in the back of your mind when you're not having that success. And so for me, I was like, well, let's just try one more thing and let's hand it a go. And it didn't work in the first month, but I enjoyed the process enough that I was like, let's go another month. And by the end of the next month, by the end of the second month, it had started to sort of pick up a little bit of traction. And so for me, it was always like, well, had I given up 2 months prior, or had I given up at the end of that first month, or had I not even started, who knows where I'd be. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of things in life where it's like that. You think back, well, as soon as you achieve something, you think back, well, what if I had have taken the other path? When I'd come to that sort of fork in the road, had I gone the other way and just ended it all and gone back into a completely different job that I didn't like, how would it have been? Like, yes, it was hard at that point. And you're thinking like, well, I'm struggling at the moment. With my art, it's not sort of taking off. It's not going the way I'd planned it to go. But is the alternative any sort of better?
And what were some of those struggles? Because I feel like so many podcasts and posts and whatever will be like, it was hard, it was a struggle, but we fail to, I guess, call some of that out very clearly. And I think that it's really affirming when you're listening, or you stumble across someone who maybe you think, who you have designed as success or who you see as successful, talk about those feelings and be like, yeah, they're actually completely normal.
I think for me, one of the hardest things that I faced as a creative person was not having friends in the industry.
Yeah.
Or not having anyone to talk to, not having anyone who understood.
Yeah.
I think that I don't think it's necessarily about friends, but just having people, having sort of companionship in any profession. I think that that's something that people who work a normal job take for granted, is that they have other staff around them.
Oh, absolutely. Like, there's nothing better than after a really hard time, whatever that looks like in your profession, being like, that really sucked. Like, did you find this? Yeah, I did find that. And then that camaraderie, I guess, that's built in that.
I think that's for me a stronger drawing card to going back to a normal job, quote unquote, would be that camaraderie, being that sort of actual having a team around you, having other people, more so than a stable income. Like, of course, you've got a stable sort of paycheck every week. That's great for a lot of people, but for me, that's not a draw card. For me, it's like having other people. And there was definitely a stage for me where I was like, I had to go and get another job to sustain that sort of side of myself, because working alone for a long time sort of started to take its toll.
Yeah, and I think that is something that can be overlooked or like considered weak, because so many people want to work from home and so many people want to do social media or content creation or whatever. And I think in our society we've romanticized it a fair bit. You know, just that whole idea. And I think the truth is that it can be super isolating, whether that is working from home from a normal job or doing content creation where you're alone all the time. And as humans, we need that social interaction. And I think that just saying like, you know what, we actually need people around us, and like that's totally fine. And if that means that you have to go sit at a cafe or get another job, or you know, that's actually really important. If anything, that is work in itself, because that's work to sustain you, and then you'll be able to actually continue making money and doing the work you need to do.
I think so. I think it sort of sustains creativity in that it drives, it sort of continues you to be out there in the world. And because, as I said before, like art influences other people. It's supposed to speak to people. So if you have got no relation with other people, it's hard to create art for people. And it's hard to have that urge and have that energy to keep turning up if you don't have that. And so that's, yeah, for sure a stage that I was going through. It was like, not working with other people is hard. And how do I find a switch in an industry where I think a lot of photographers are working against each other, probably more so than a lot of other industries. As artists, I think it's fine, because I think, especially now, I think there's enough to go around, especially when my target audience now is anyone in the world. Like, I think as artists, quote unquote, if you're like a musician, if you're an artist who can sell work anywhere in the world, you think that your audience is huge, you don't care. But for service-based businesses in small areas, when they sell a specific product to a small market, it can often feel like you're going up against the other person. So for me as a photographer, other photographers were very closed off and didn't want to work with other photographers because they were seen as that's my competition. And so people wouldn't share other photographers' work. They wouldn't go online and talk with other photographers because they were scared that photographer was going to take their work. And it's a very sad place to be in that position. Whereas I was always like, well, look, if I hand a client to another photographer, that's totally fine, because if that person is more aligned with them, then it's cool. I don't want to work with people who aren't aligned with me. I want people who are aligned with me, and I will attract the right people. And if other people attract the right people for them, then there's enough to go around. But that was one of the hardest things in that space.
So thinking about practical tips that like someone could literally take, stop listening to this podcast at the end and implement to reduce isolation and loneliness based on your experience, what would that be?
I think you have to put yourself out there. And I think it's hard to say, and I really hate to say it really, because I know where I was 3 years ago, thinking that I was an introverted person who enjoyed working from home because I didn't have to go out and talk to a lot of people. I didn't have to put myself out there, thinking that it was nice that, I didn't have to try to be someone every single day. But I think every now and again it is nice. And the times where I have chatted to people or met people, really good people, are the times that I put myself out there, because a lot of other people put themselves out there as well because they want that. Yeah. And so whether that be going to an event around your certain area of creativity, around whatever you do as an artist, or going to a workshop, or going to a talk, or going somewhere else and just being around other people. You don't even necessarily have to talk to them. Just being around that energy, I think, brings up confidence over time that, eventually if I keep going, maybe I'll talk to one person, or maybe I'll have a chat to someone and then they'll put me in touch with someone else, because a lot of time that has happened. Yeah,
prior to us going on the road, I actually worked in the mental health profession, and it was something that we often talk to people about, is around like sitting down and writing places and spaces where you feel safe and also you feel a sense of like belonging and community. So whether that's like going to the same cafe every day and just seeing the barista or the staff there, or like maybe it's going to the library and reading your book there rather than reading it at home. And I think that they're sitting down actually thinking about that, and always prior to the time that you feel isolated or lonely, before it gets too bad, if you can, because when we are in that state of sadness or isolation or whatever that might else be, often people, you know, it blurs our thinking. But I think that we all can implement that in different ways. So for you, that was, you know, getting another job. For other people, that might be, you know, working at a cafe once a week, or working at the library, or, you know, hiring out a co-working space. I think it can look different depending on what you feel like is accessible for yourself.
Well, it could even be offering your services for free just to work more.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people when they're first starting, they don't have a lot of work. And so experience working is something that you need. Not only just to get the portfolio work, but to get experience working with other people, because that builds confidence. And so if it is, say, like going and volunteering your services with something completely outside of your normal area, offering to do something for someone else as an artist just for free, just to get work, just to get that interaction with other people, I think is nice. But also then it might be working within your industry, offering to work for someone else to get connection and to speak with them, and then through that maybe then you'll get confidence to go out and do something by yourself.
Yeah. And what about creativity? So we've talked about like some of the impacts around being an actual creative person in terms of your business and what that looks like in terms of isolation. But what about just being a creative person? How does that impact on your well-being? And yeah.
I think for me as an artist, it's hard because I've always worked for other people. And this is one of the hardest things that I'm trying to combat now, is like, what do I like? What is it that sparks me? You know, like I definitely have a style, and I have things, the way that I do things is informed by what I like, but I'm always creating for a client. I'm always working for a client. So for me now to be like creating content, creating videos, creating products, creating courses, creating community, creating podcasts, like what do I like? What do I want to do?
Yeah.
Because this is not for anyone. So how do you find something that you like within that?
Yeah. And I think that's such a good point, because as we've kind of transitioned into life on the road, I guess weddings have come up a lot because you've been moving away from that. And I guess like the effort of having a wedding, like it's a huge process of like meeting the couple before, actually taking photos of their wedding, editing it, delivering a gallery. And I've seen an impact on you. And because I think it's not how you're choosing to be creative at the moment. It's not what you actually, it's not where your heart is being drawn to, but you have these external stakeholders that, you know, you do have to meet deadlines for.
I definitely love being a photographer, but sometimes it can be draining working for clients. And I think that is something that can't go unsaid for a lot of artists when they work in a service-based industry. When you're working for a client, there's always going to be expectation that you have to create for the client. So how do you balance that? How you position your style and creating something that you love? I think expectation with the client, first and foremost, is important because they know what they're going to get. And so, like, I never have anyone come back to me about my style, the way I edit photos, the way I take photos, because I'm very clear up front about this is the way that I do things.
Yeah.
But I think there's a draining process in that of like having to do it the same every single time to stick with a style and
like
not being able to
experiment.
not being able to go outside the box, I think is hard. But I think that's something that I'm starting to do now more in my own photography and going out and taking photos myself, because it opens me up to more ideas. Like the more I get creative with it, like yes, I may not be taking the best photos I've ever taken. Like there is something to be said for taking the same photo every single time. When you're working with clients, when you're performing any type of art, you stick to a process, you're probably going to get really good results every single time if you've got something down pat. But you're never going to get creative with it. You're never going to create something new and interesting because
Yeah.
you're always doing the same thing. So over time, it's going to get a little bit boring for you. So how do you switch that up? I think experimenting in your own personal art is great because it allows you to do things, try things before you bring them into something that you're doing professionally.
And I think it'll often bring that love or encouragement or inspiration back. And I think this is so much bigger than photography because everyone experiences it in their own way. I experienced it in my own way that, you know, I was so passionate about in the advocacy space. And when I graduated uni, I thought I was going to go change the world. And I had so many ideas and so many things. And then I had to keep turning up for a 9-to-5 job every day, being told, this is how you advocate, this is how you write policy, this is how you help people. And then you get so busy doing the same thing over and over and over again that you forget to look up and be like, whoa, I actually have all of these ideas. And if I had the time to sit in it and take a moment, then I would be able to come up with these amazing ideas, or at least have space to get, you know, problem solve and think about what's important to you. So I think it's definitely a good thing for us all to take a step back and also give ourselves some grace to be like, well, maybe we're just not allowing the space to be creative at the moment because we're being told what our creativity looks like.
Also, the space to think that, are you enjoying what you're doing right now?
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing. I guess you may be creative, you may be doing really good work and seeing a lot of success, but are you enjoying it? I think that's a big question of like, when you take that step back, when you take a break, those things start to come to the surface of being like, well, maybe I am not enjoying it as much as I once thought I was because I've just been on that treadmill for so long.
So we've obviously had a lot of life change. We've had a lot of things happening in your work, personally. Now that you've, I guess, get to have the space, let's just pretend that there are no expectations, there's no external stakeholders. How would you, or what's next in your creativity? What would you love to do or experiment within your creative, you know, being a creative person? Stop it.
I think something that I've always said is I would love to experiment with being able to find a way to make art sustainable in the way that I think a lot of people fall into creating art for clients because they think it's a more sustainable way to do work, to do business, and to make to sort of turn what they love into a job, into a career, because it's easy to sell your work to someone else because you're just working for them. And I think inherently through that process, you start to lose interest in it because you're working for someone else, you're not working for yourself. And you started it to work for yourself, but through that process over the years, you've just ended up working for someone else.
Yeah.
And a lot of people love to stick on, you know, working with the same clients, especially if you're working in a sort of business space where you're, you know, working for someone as a photographer, a designer, any type of artist. You're working in a business space where you're working with the same client over and over again. You're just a hired person for them.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard to get creative. So for me, one of the things that I'd love to do and explore creatively is like, how do you make art sustainable just for yourself?
Yeah.
In any form, anything that you enjoy, how can you make that sustainable? I think when I was studying photography especially, it was like, well, what path can I go down that is going to provide me an income? Because at the end of the day, that's what I need to enjoy what I love. And yes, that's worked for a lot of years. And yes, I found something that I really loved as well. But how do I make other things work now? You know, how can I do two things? Because there's more that I enjoy than just photography. You know, so how can I make other things sustainable? I think it's going to be a creative process in that, because it's allowed to be a bit more free. Because I'm not confined to, well, I have to make an income from it by the end of like next week.
Yeah.
I can just throw a few things at the wall and see what sticks, see what works.
And I think that's what's so like cool about what we're doing. In terms of, yes, we do need money to be traveling on the road, but we need significantly less than what we did when we were living in Sydney and, you know, renting a house, etc. So it's almost like creating that space a little bit to take a little bit more risk financially, but also, you know, you have like so many beautiful spaces and places that you're going to be visiting that I'm sure inspiration will hit. And so I think it'll be really cool to see how that kind of progresses and what the next iteration of you as a creative person and you within your creative journey so far.
I think that's the same for a lot of people as well, like understanding what your advantage is. Like what do you have right now? Like if you've gotten to a point where you've started a business and it's really starting to do well, but you're just not enjoying it so much, how can you make a plan to try to make something else work as well? Like I think that's very fortunate for us, is that, you know, I have the online space now that's working well, and being able to sell products and have a community that's working really well. So now I'm like, well, now what else can I do? You know, I've had a photography business that's working really well. So what else can I do on the side that maybe to be able to give me space to do something else? And very fortunate. But the same way in, like, if you have a job now that you hate, if it isn't a creative job and you're trying to get into a creative field, how can you make a plan to hold on to that job that you've got because it's providing you an income right now? But use that advantage that you have of having a stable income to help you start something else and help you to go into a different field and try new things until you find something that works. Like the worst position, I think, when I first started photography was like, I didn't have another job. I just started, and then it was very stressful to be like, well, now I need to make ends meet immediately from the start. I need to be able to earn an income pretty quickly. So it didn't give me a lot of chance to experiment in a lot of different things. Yes, I did try a few different things through that process, but there was always that overhanging thing of like, well, I need to make it work immediately. But for a lot of people, if they're starting in a job, well, you've got the time. You know, maybe give yourself 12 months and say, well, I'm going to try a few things over this 12 months, and at the end of it, I'm going to make sure that I have something and continually build up to that. I also want to say that it's not easy. Like, this path is not easy. It's not been well formed, and there's a reason that, you know, you're still like sitting here listening to this podcast, you're watching this podcast because you are a creative person. You want to make something more of yourself and do more than the average person is doing. So, you know, it's not going to be easy because not a lot of people have done it before, but it can be done. So give yourself time and also understand that it's okay to have ups and downs through that. It's not all going to be sunshine and rainbows throughout that whole process. There's going to be ups and downs throughout it, but just stick with the process. And I think that's important and something that's helped me a lot. I think ask for help as well. Like, put yourself out there. Go and talk to other people in your industry and other industries as well. That's why I love the idea of this podcast, is speaking to people from other industries as well and hearing how they do things, because it inspires me a lot in the way I do things in my industry. So talk to other people, talk to anyone you possibly can. I think that helps you understand that you're not alone in that, because it can get very isolating.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is so affirming for a lot of people to hear. And also, as someone who has been very close to you throughout this whole process, seeing what could be described as a bit of like an emotional roller coaster for not just you, for me, but for us. And, you know, it really is challenging. And so take care of yourself and be kind to yourself, and know that there are, like, a lot of people struggle with it. And I think we obviously didn't touch on it here, but like even the impact that it's had on our kind of relationship and how we interact with each other, like, just because people aren't talking about it necessarily doesn't mean they're not experiencing it, because they are. Yeah. I
don't think there's a day that goes by where I don't constantly think about what the sort of next thing is going to be, like how things are going to look, how things are going to be planning moving forward, and there's that constant stress. I think
it's so exhausting.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's something that often goes overlooked. That a lot of people just think that you can start something and it's easy, and I think for a lot of us, like, we are always wanting to try the new thing and try to move on and progress our business, and with that comes that level of uncertainty, that level of insecurity in what we're trying to do, because not anyone else has necessarily done it before, and we don't have people to talk to. So make sure that you do put yourself out there, but understand that it's okay to be feeling that way, because probably other people are. And if you're scared to reach out to someone, then probably know that they're scared to reach out to you, but they're probably feeling the same way as well. So they probably have something that they can provide. Well, I think that's where we're going to end this episode today, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this one. If you do have any questions, feel free to send me a message on Instagram. Feel free to reach out and we can have a chat about anything. I'm always open to answering questions from anyone, and hopefully through this episode I've answered a few things, but there's always more that could be talked about, and we can always do a round 2 on this as well, and maybe open up for some questions that you guys have as well. But we'll be in touch again. I'm sure that you'll hear a lot more from me coming forward. We'll be going back to regular episodes from next week, but I just did want to drop in this episode in here just to give it a bit of a break up and talk about where we are at life at the moment. And I think it's super important to be open and transparent, and I think hopefully hearing a bit more about my story helps you guys as well hear about understand where you're at and helps you to guide yourself moving forward. If you did enjoy today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you did leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify. Or if you're watching over on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and leave us a comment down below to let us know that you did enjoy this episode. Also, feel free to share this episode on Instagram and tag me at Mike Jeffrey Photography so I can reshare them on my stories. And also message me and let me know who you would love to hear on an upcoming episode of this podcast. You know, I've always tried my best to be able to have conversations with people who are in the creative space and people that I think would be a good fit on this podcast, and I would love your input as well. In a very privileged position at the moment where, you know, I'm able to reach out to people and have them on my podcast and have really interesting conversations with a whole range of people in the creative space and talk about their creative journey. So if there is anyone you would love to hear from, please let me know and I will do my best to try to get them on the podcast. At this time, I would also like to acknowledge the first creatives of the land on which I am recording today, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of so-called Australia. As we tell stories of today, I just want to reflect on how First Nations people here and across the globe have guided and informed our understanding of the creative journey. But until next week, friends, have a lovely week and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye. Editing and post-production on this episode was done by Mossy Media, and music was created by JWPATON.
Hey Mike.